Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to You Are Wrong with our first episode of Record Reviews. Now, I want to say a few things before we start. I have decided to try and group two albums together for these review episodes. I'm not really interested in just talking about my personal taste of music, so I think picking two albums for contrast and compare could make for some nice discussions. This also allows me to be a little bit lazy, which is always good. I like to take my time with new records when it comes to reviewing them. I don't enjoy rushing myself into an opinion. For today's episode, I've picked new albums of two artists whose largely postmodern approach made for some of the last decade's most popular releases. Kevin Parker and Claire Boucher. Or Boucher? I stick with Claire Boucher, she's Canadian, so. AKA TAME IMPALA and GRIMES. Postmodernism isn't an easy movement to define. Part of that is because the term postmodern is used so liberally and it's pretty much being applied to anything that seems vaguely deconstructivist or meta. In my book, postmodernism in popular music constitutes a reworking of foreign genre elements and references into an organic tapestry that expands upon the original work and can even be seen as a comment thereof. In other words, it's self-referential pop that sounds like stuff you remember from the radio, or YouTube, or Daddy's car stereo, but also adds something to it that pretty much expands on what it sounds like. In the case of TAME IMPALA and GRIMES, it's been fairly clear what Boucher and Parker are interested in. TAME IMPALA's first two albums merged the songwriting style of Beatlesque 60s psychedelia and 70s yacht rock with the hazy production aesthetics of chillwave and hypnagogic pop. GRIMES, meanwhile, seemed more interested in world music and 80s dream pop, adding to it the distorted minimalism of the short-lived female-centric movement known as Crimson Wave. Essentially, it's a bedroom variant of synth pop, a little less anxious witch house. God, what have Y2K genres even become? Anyways, with their last two albums, Currents and Art Angels, both artists moved on from hazy lo-fi aesthetics and into the realm of bombastic radio pop productions. And that's where the parallels between them set in. Both released in 2015, both concerned with millennial anxiety, and both kind of latching onto this new trend of multicolored zoomer psychedelia. Parker looked for inspiration in baroque 80s, new romantic, and synth pop, resembling New Order, Tears for Fears, and Frankie Goes to Hollywood. It's a very dance-oriented album, which, while not original at all, provides some real bops. I mean, the less I know, the better. What else can I say? That song is a damn bop right there. GRIMES, meanwhile, allegedly found inspiration for Art Angels in saccharine East Asian pop songs, which is most apparent in multiple anime character-like shrieks throughout the various songs, but most of it sounds much more like late 90s radio pop, especially the title track, and easily sound like they could be All Saints songs, circa Pure Shores. Both records sold thousands of copies and were instantly canonized by the music press. I personally thought they are both decent, a little schizophrenic, a little too referential, and with a fair balance of bangers and fillers. They're very good, but maybe not as legendary as the releases they had before, both the ones that are regarded as the peak of their artistic output and their early, more esoteric works. Now, it took both artists 5 years to produce a follow-up. 5 years. That's a long time. And both emerged to the world pretty much at the same time. And well, what a chaotic time it is right now. And yes, I think that both albums absolutely reflect a certain sense of anxiety and chaos in very, very specific ways for both artists. While Parker has been vocal about reworking his material under the influence of severe anxiety and pressure, Boucher teased a concept album about an apocalyptic climate change goddess or something, which she labeled Miss Anthropocene, and who would consume oil or something? Well, it sounds intriguing on paper, and while Parker pretty much descended into social isolation for the writing and recording of his latest, Boucher went full Kanye. Media supervillain? Let's just say she did a lot of fairly eccentric and maybe problematic and maybe hilarious stuff. I'm not sure if it was intended as being hilarious. It's evident both artists struggled with living up to the high ambitions they set themselves. And in a way, that uncertainty regarding the material is also reflected within the two albums that we have here. The slow rush continues Parker's interests in dance rhythms and synthpop, evident on Currents. There's a lot of weird instrumentation here that you wouldn't find on Currents though, like pan flutes and lots of bongos, and of course, just like on Currents, lots and lots of synthesizers. It's a very, very disco-centric record. But in a way, it also abandons the more modern moments of its predecessor. With its post-hypnosis cover and Supertramp falsettos all over it, the record feels like Parker is playing it a little safe, which in itself doesn't have to be a bad thing. And let's look at some of the better tracks here. Posthumous Forgiveness has a nice 60s vibe, even though I could swear I've heard that guitar line before somewhere. Breathe Deeper is a nice chillwave throwback, and Tomorrow's Dust's Caribbean atmosphere, Trevor Horn-style bongos included, is really, really nice. But it's songs like Instant Destiny, Lost in Yesterday, and It Might Be Time that just cut a little too close to home with AOR, at least for me. As I stated previously, a lot of what determines whether postmodernism succeeds or not is how significators of past movements and styles can be integrated into a larger whole that reflects or comments on the original. There needs to be some sort of cathartic effect for the listener, an eureka moment that elevates the homage into new territory. And in the case of these songs, they just reflect a desire to adapt the ways of Supertramp, Toto, or the Bee Gees to the current generation. So there's nothing really wrong with these songs, they just seem to be progressively caught within themselves, too concerned with an aesthetic idea and not fully evolving a structure. Mostly, it reminds me of the Franz Ferdinand album Tonight, a record that also grappled with urges of disco approval and ended up a footnote in the band's history. It's odd, because Current's strongest feat was how especially the singles managed to stay memorable, no matter if you appreciated the songs or not. In the end, there's something rushed about the end product here, like the title suggests ironically. Now, the same cannot be said about the new Grimes. A sparkling feast of futurist beats and hyper-modern references. It's as 2020 as it could be. What could possibly go wrong? Well, first of all, I don't get the concept of Miss Anthropocene. On paper, it all makes sense. Grimes' description of this Zoomer death goddess and her photoshoots accompanying it all seemed like a clean-cut idea. Problem is that I can't find evidence of that within the record's lyrical themes. Mostly the songs seem to reflect on Grimes' struggle in the limelight. There's not really much of the teased new metal influences either, besides My Name is Dark, which is still quite reserved in being new metal. In fact, aesthetically, the album is kind of all over the place. There's Icy Witch House in Darkside, like the DC comic character. Post-Vaporwave Dream Punk in the ways of HKE via the song 4AM, Natalie Imbruglia style 90s pop with Delete Forever. There's even some garbage and early Avril Lavigne comparisons I could make here. It's kind of bouncing back and forth between ambient sound experiments and this unstoppable urge for Y2K female radio pop. Miss Anthropocene most of all reminds me of listening to radio stations targeting teens circa 1999. There is some nice Easter eggs here, like the outro of New Gods, which resembles Resident Evil 7's safe room music, that is definitely more current. But just like the slow rush, there's an overabundance of nostalgia here, a desire for simpler pop music, an attempt at uniting the conservative folk of Taylor Swift with the post-humanism of Sophie. The DC comic references within the song titles and half-baked death goddess concept also suggests that we witness an artistic struggle that isn't fully resolved. Something I find both interesting and a little, let's say, grating here and there. Sometimes it succeeds, sometimes it doesn't. But hey, it's interesting. Ironically, I actually enjoy this heterogenic outcome a little more than Art Angels. There's a tension and melancholia here that Art Angels largely evaded. It's not like Grimes is self-reflective here, but it's a little more concerned, maybe, is the right word. It's hard to pin Miss Anthropocene down, especially in comparison to the Slow Rush, which is so easy to categorize as just another step in the Tame Impala evolution towards being a mainstream act. That's probably mostly due to the fact that Grimes made a very self-contradictory album, which within its inability to untangle its many urges is a much more personal affair than the Slow Rush, which seems much more like an attempt at skillfully assembled escapism. In the end, both albums are enjoyable experiences, but both also are documents of how too much success can make an artist lose focus and end up with an attempt to articulate contradictions rather than concentrate on what emotions they originally succeeded to convey with their most beloved albums. And that's it for today with, hey, the first record review episode of You Are Wrong. Thank you so much, please subscribe and stay with us. Have a nice evening, good night.